welcome to the Prepared Homestead. This is Travis. Thank you all for stopping by to watch. So today I want to talk to you about something that I'm starting to see happen, I guess, within the kind of preparedness communities online. And it's one of two things that I'm seeing a lot of, and that is this overly hype and fear. It's panic time, it's bad, the world is collapsing, everything's falling apart. Or the other flip side is that it's not a big deal. This is all hype. Nothing's different. Everything's happening just like it always happens before, and there's nothing to get worried about. So just go about your business. I think both can be dangerous. But I think one can be much more dangerous than the other. And I want to talk about that because I don't want anyone on here to live in fear. And I don't want anyone to lose sleep and to panic and to just, be so overwhelmed with all this stuff that's going on that we should get prepared for, the things that are happening, the food shortages and potential food shortages and the price increases, inflation and potential war and all this kind of stuff. I don't want people to be so overwhelmed by it that they just aren't able to function. But on the other hand, I don't think it's very good to just, say, it's not really a big deal. It's not going to happen. It's not a big deal. This kind of stuff happens all the time. I mean, it just, for generations, we have experienced this kind of stuff and we've gotten through it. It's not a big deal. Don't worry. Just go about your business and don't think that this is a big deal. The problem is that when we do that, way too many people, they do that. They just kind of, because they're already fighting with this living in denial, okay? Many people, even amongst us preppers, are already kind of living in that denial, or at least fighting with that, of that all this stuff that's happening. You know what? Maybe I'm overreacting to it. Maybe it's not really as bad as what I think. In fact, even myself here on this channel, when I come up with a video topic to do, at times I have to put myself in check. I don't want to get on here and I don't want to scare everyone to death. Okay? If I read something that I think is extremely important that I need to get out to you, I have to sometimes rein it in. I don't want to get on here, and some channels do that, and just terrify everyone because, the sky's falling. It's falling right now. But on the other hand, I struggle with not being too calm. I don't want to come across as, well, it's not really a big deal right now. Both are dangerous, but I think one is really dangerous. There are people out there that try to kind of spin information and tell us that, all this stuff that's being talked about on YouTube channels and in the kind of preparedness community, it is not really that big of a deal. This stuff has been happening for decades, for generations, and nothing is different now than what it's been before. And I'm here to tell you that that's not true. Most of the stuff that's happening right now has never really happened before, not in the way that it's happened, or it's never happened where there's been multiple things all at once happening. I think, and this is just my opinion, that we as modern American Westerners have lived such a comfortable life. I mean, really, we have. And there's going to be some of you that said, well, not my life. I struggled. I grew up poor. I've lived with abuse. I've, lived with tragedy. And that's very true with many of you. But I'm talking about as a whole, as a people, we have lived a very easy life. In fact, to the point of it being quite boring. Where people in other countries and other cultures in the last few generations, and even now, still have to deal with the possibility of starvation. They still have to deal with threats to their lives on a daily basis, whether through just criminal activity or warlords or their own government coming in and trampling all over them because they have no recognized rights in their country. Wars happen in other countries, civil wars, conflicts, quite often. Here in America, not so much. In fact, it's been well over a century since a war happened on American soil in the continental United States. And so Americans, in large part, have really been sheltered from how bad the world can be. And I think because of that, the only thing that most Americans, and I get it, I'm generalizing, but the only thing that most Americans can look to get an idea of what life would be like if it was really bad, if there was a real SHTF, if there was a real apocalypse, is by looking to Hollywood. And unfortunately, more times than not, Hollywood paints a false picture. Sometimes they get it right on how people might react during some type of apocalyptic end of the world scenario, but almost always they get wrong on how one of those scenarios happened. And what I mean by that is just about every movie and TV show that's ever been, that I'm aware of, that's ever been out, that that portrays a end of world kind of scenario, it almost always happens because of one singular event that brings us to that. One big event, a volcano going off, an asteroid striking, a nuclear bomb going off. There's always just one thing, usually in all of these movies, that happens that sets the collapse into motion. Well, the reality is history shows us that that's just not true. I mean, black swan events can happen, and they have happened to cultures and civilizations in the past, and they have most definitely caused some of those to collapse. But the general rule that causes civilizations to collapse, or that causes even long period, SHTFs, it's usually a progression of things that leading up to a point. And sometimes that progression of things can last and take months or even years to happen, sometimes even decades. And I think that's where we're at right now. We're probably at the end of those decades of changes incrementally here and there. And it's like cooking a frog in a frying pan. We all know the analogy. It's happening a little bit over time, and we're constantly saying, well, we thought that was going to be the end of the world, and well, it didn't, and we're still moving along. And then the next thing happens, and we get a little scared, and we think, oh, that's going to be the end of the world, and well, it doesn't happen, and things move on. And what happens is it's conditioning us, because we believe, according to what we've learned in Hollywood, that the end of the world happens big time. It's a big singular event that happens, and then the next day you wake up. You go to bed in a normal world, and then you wake up and the world is turned upside down. And so we're all waiting for that moment, and it never seems to happen. And so many people think, well, because it's never happened, it's just not gonna happen. And all these things that are going on right now, and that have for the last weeks and months, that many of us are warning and saying, this is bad, this is a recipe for disaster. Many people say, yeah, but it happened and the world's still moving along as normal, so everything must be fine. And I think because of that, this kind of cognitive dissonance slips in. And so many people keep seeing these events happen, and they say, well, it may be bad, but stuff like that's happened in the past and we survived, and we'll survive again. Well, they're partly right. I think that most of us will survive all this. It's just the quality of our life will be drastically changed. And the part that I don't believe is correct is that this stuff has happened in the past and we made it through it, so it'll happen again and we're fine. The part of that that's not true, like I said a moment ago, is that the things that are happening now are happening in multiple areas. It's like there's an attack on all sides. It's not just an attack being there's a drought and farmers aren't able to plant and harvest as much as normal because of a drought. It's not just that, because we've dealt with that, and farmers have dealt with droughts for eons. Throughout all of history, and including American history, different regions, almost every year, there's a region that they're under drought conditions, and we get through it. But never before has America experienced a 1,200-year drought. Never before have we ever experienced a drought as severe and as widespread as we are in right now. So when we go back and we say, well, 30, 40, 50, 60 years ago, there was a drought and everyone survived and there wasn't food shortages then, we'll do this time. Well, this time it is worse. It is different. It's not the same. It's the same way with gas prices. Oh, well, we've had high gas prices in the past. I mean, during the Obama administration, gas was really high. And we lived just fine through that. I mean, it wasn't pleasant, but we survived. Well, that's true. But gas prices on average right now are about 60 cents a gallon higher than the peak during the Obama administration. But that's not the only thing. During the Obama administration, at that peak gas prices, inflation was about 1.5 to 1.9%. Right now, it's conservatively at 10% and most likely and realistically at 15 to 17%. So everything's costing more. So the cost of doing business for truckers and farmers that use a lot of fuel, they're not just paying high gas prices and diesel prices, they're paying high prices for everything. We could go on with this, of how a certain article or a certain statistic or a certain number may make things look, well, not quite as bad. And maybe that one thing isn't an end of a world kind of event. You know, the fact that Ukraine, we're not getting any wheat. Ukraine isn't exporting any wheat. And Russia seems to only be going to export their wheat to places like China and maybe India and not to the rest of the world. And we could say, well, I mean, we don't get any wheat from Ukraine and Russia, or we get very, very little. So it's not going to affect us. Well, that's just not true. Because while they only produce a smaller percentage of the entire wheat's, growth, all the wheat that's grown on the planet, Russia and Ukraine are the largest exporters of wheat, meaning that a lot of these countries that don't grow their own wheat and can't grow their own wheat, they get it from Russia and Ukraine. And even though those countries may not be us, it's still going to affect us because it's not 1950 anymore, folks. We're in a global economy and we're in a globalist, existence, really. And it's like a butterfly effect. And if Egypt runs out of food and their country falls apart and there's war and there's a lot of violence and instability there, it's eventually going to affect us. It could affect us because a lot of these, third world struggling nations that could be in jeopardy of going through massive famines because of this are also some of the same places that a lot of terrorism comes from. So we could feel the effects there. A bunch of starving people that are angry, and then they see America that now has pretty much open borders, and we have plenty. That could be a problem. There's also the possibility of us sending a lot of our food that we have over to these countries. That's a very likely scenario. In fact, our own president has said so much that that's exactly what we're going to do because we produce a lot. But do we really produce a lot? I mean, America produces a lot of food. I'll give you that. But do we produce a lot of food? I mean, for decades now, we have been paying farmers not to produce food. That's not a big secret. Most people know that. And if you don't, it doesn't take that long to kind of research it and find out that it's been going on for decades. So why is it any different now? Well, it is different now because, number one, that's just one piece of this greater puzzle of all these other things happening. But also, President Biden has added an additional 4 million acres of America's farmland to the conservation list, and they're paying farmers to not produce on an additional 4 million acres on top of what we've produced in the past. So that's 4 million less acres of farmland that's not being produced. We're also dealing with just a less quality of production because of the drought, and we're producing less overall than we have in decades. In fact, I pointed out several times on this channel that American farmers are producing about 20 million less acres of farmland a year than we did back in 2008. 20 million less acreages than 2008. That's significant. And you take that and you add that to the recipe of all these other things happening. Fertilizer shortages. I mean, there are real fertilizer shortages, and while it's undetermined yet how bad that effect will be felt this planting season, it's definitely going to be affecting. In fact, so much so that about 4% less corn is going to be produced this year because corn uses a lot of fertilizer, and the farmers instead are going to be planting soybean because soybean uses little to none. And so right there's 4% less corn that's being produced this year already. And that's not including the farmers that have said, we're just not producing because we can't afford it. Like we can't afford to do this. Our profit margin is so tight that because of the increased of cost of doing business, we can't afford to even plant anymore. That's happening also. Same way as it's happening with the ethanol and fuel. A lot of people talk about that. Some people say it's not a big deal because we've been putting ethanol in fuel for years. And it's true, we have, unfortunately. It's crazy that we take the food that Americans eat the most, that's in the most of all of our food products, and we actually turn it into gasoline. And it's not only that we turn it into gasoline, but using corn to make ethanol is about the most inefficient way to make ethanol, and it's also very damaging to our vehicles. But we have been doing it for decades, except this year's different. We're going to go from 10% ethanol in our gasoline to 15%, increasing it by an additional 5%. And that's a big deal. That's a lot of ethanol. And that's a lot more corn on a tight market that's being taken out of the mouths of you and your livestock and being put into vehicles. And not only that, because of the increase of ethanol in gasoline, it's going to cause the wear and tear on your vehicles to be even worse. So the longevity and the long-term cost of running your vehicle is going to increase because they're putting more ethanol in it. You see, it's not just one event that's causing all of this. It's not one event that I look at and say, we could have some serious food shortages. It's all of these things put together. And Americans, I believe, have been so kind of brainwashed to think that it's only a singular event could cause a major catastrophe, that when we don't see that one big singular event, well, we just think things are normal, and it's just a lot of, craziness that's going on that'll pass. But all this craziness that's happening, it's going to catch up with us. I said just the other day, most of the things that's happened that we've talked about are things that we wouldn't even feel the repercussions of them for actually months to come. And so even though we see things happening in the news, maybe in the immediate, or a decision that's been made, the actual repercussions of those aren't going to be felt for most things for months to come. And all of this possibility of bad times ahead are all based on just the information that we have right now in our hands. What happens if weeks down the road a world war breaks out? Or if months down the road something even worse happens to the supply chain? There is a possibility of things just actually getting worse, just like they have for the last 2 years, where many, if not all of you, have said it's just like one thing after another. It wasn't just one singular event of a health crisis that shut things down for a while. It was one thing after another, after another, after another. And it's led us up to this point that we're at now. And it's very likely that those one thing after another is going to continue to happen and continue to worsening things and continue increasing the speed of the timeline of a collapse. Now the question is this collapse going to happen? And when is it going to happen? I think it's inevitable that's going to happen. I think scientifically we can do the math and we can look throughout history and we know that that's the direction we're headed. I don't really think that there's any question that we are headed towards a collapse. I think the question is when will we get to that collapse? Is it months, years, decades, centuries? Well, I think it's sooner than later. So I think we can kind of forget the centuries things. And it's possible that it could be decades. I think the most likely scenario is months or years, though. And the reason is because it's just happening at the speed, the repetition at which this stuff happens. It's more and more. It's becoming a bigger deal. The nation as itself is losing grip internationally, our dollar, our moral standards, everything. And it's happening at a faster pace. So I do think that it's going to happen probably sooner than later. Could it be this year? Maybe, possibly. But it may not be for another 2 or 3 years. But the point is that we are seeing rapid, massive, detrimental changes that are happening to our system. And whether you want to believe it's going to happen tomorrow or 2 years down the road, the fact is it's going to happen. It almost has to at this point because so many things have happened. And so when I say that, I don't mean that we should all start panicking and that we should all go and run and hide in bunkers somewhere or sticking our heads in the sand because it's so overwhelming. What it means is that we can actually have a good idea of what's coming at us. And it's not going to be like some Hollywood movie where we just wake up one day and the apocalypse has happened. In fact, for most people, the apocalypse, the SHTF, will have long since happened before most people realize it's actually really happened. That's kind of how these things work. If you look throughout history, you'll see. And then by the time people wake up and realize it's happened, it's far too late to do anything about it and to prepare. And that's when the real crisis kicks in, because there is no food, there is no other things, and everyone all of a sudden realizes that they need it. So that's why you and I prepare now, okay? I heard another YouTube channel a week or so ago say something like this, that it's better, and I would rather be 5 years too early on my preparations than 5 seconds too late. I would rather prepare, do all this time and money spent on getting myself ready for what's to come and sit around for 5 years waiting for it to happen, then realize 5 seconds after it happens that, you know what, I should probably do something to get ready. Because after the fact is a little too late, folks. It's kind of like buying insurance after you've wrecked your car. It doesn't really work that way. So don't get scared. I mean, as believers, those of you that are believers, we shouldn't be scared about this at all because we already know what's going to happen. We've read the end of the book already. So we don't want to get scared. We don't want to live in panic. We don't want to lose sleep over it. But yet we don't want to discount it as, well, this has just already happened before. This is just what we do every year. Every year we go through crazy things like this and we make it out ahead. Yes, every year we do. But there's not every year that we have so many things happening all at once, and that every single one of them, it's like a pickaxe constantly wailing away at a big dam. At some point, that dam's going to give way. It's going to come crashing down. And I think that pickaxe has been swinging for a while. The time left before that dam breaks probably isn't too much longer, folks. So I'd like to think that we find ourselves somewhere in the middle between hyper, scared, panic, and so, laid back and uncaring because we think we have all the time in the world left. Let's try to find ourselves somewhere in the middle and realize that these events that are happening are very real. And they've not happened before, not either like this, or they've not happened before in conjunction with all these other many things that are going on all at the same time. And when you put them all together, that's when you do have a perfect storm for disaster. Folks, get ready. Get your houses in order. Prepare yourselves mentally, physically, and most especially spiritually. Thank you for watching. I'll catch you in the next video.